Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another New Year, New Language Summit presentation. Today, I'm glad to be joined by my good friend Luca Lamparello to talk about his 5 key principles of starting any language. And actually, these principles are not just for starting the language, they're also for succeeding and progressing. But it's a great set of principles to abide by as a new language learner. And these will set you up for long-term success. Luca is a fantastic language learner himself. He speaks over 10 languages at really high levels. So definitely listen to what he has to say. And yeah, I hope you can use it in your own language learning missions. Thank you so much for being part of this first ever New Year, New Language Summit. It's always difficult to start something new, but I'm really proud of what we've managed to build up, and I hope you're enjoying it. And if you have any feedback or comments for us, you can always leave it in the comments field below this video or in the chat box on one of the sides. I'm not sure where it is. So enjoy this presentation with Luca, and I will see you in the next one. All right, Luca, welcome to the New Year, New Language Summit.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. And today, obviously, we have this conference that's designed for the beginner language learner who are learning their first or maybe one of their first languages. And I know you have a lot of ideas and strategies for them to listen to today, but what can we expect?
I'm going to talk about 5 rules that one should abide by, or at least I think one should abide by when starting to learn a language. I believe that, especially for language learners who are just starting now to learn a new language, it's important to have some guidelines that will help them get started, because I think getting started is really let's say the kind of a delicate phase in the language learning stretch in general. But once you're past that, then you can cover the stretch. It's a marathon, but it's going to be a great one.
Sounds good. So what's the first principle?
So the first principle is to know exactly why you're learning a language. I believe that a lot of language learners, a lot of beginners, they start learning a language without knowing exactly why they're starting a language. Maybe they heard that, I don't know, Chinese is cool, so they want to try their hand at Chinese, or maybe Spanish is something that everybody is learning, so they should learn Spanish as well. I believe these are kind of external reasons. I believe that if you really understand why, if you connect emotionally with the language, then no matter what, no matter how difficult the path, the journey is going to be, you're going to overcome all the obstacles. And I believe that this should be said, and it's something important to take into account even before talking about the nitty-gritty details of methods and how to do this and how to do that. It's the why. If you know the why, then you'll figure out the how. And in that regard, I have a very simple piece of advice that has always worked for me, and also for a lot of students of mine. And that is to take some 30 minutes, even before starting the language, take some 30 minutes and imagine yourself in the future. Just jot down a little story that should be realistic. How are you going to use the language? How do you how do you imagine yourself speaking that language in the future, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And imagine something realistic. I'm going to start learning Serbian, for example. And this is something I do for every language that I learn. I sit down and I just, I don't even use the computer. I just write by hand a little story of myself 3 years from now. An example, 2024, I'm in Serbia. I'm chatting with some friends in Belgrade, speaking about the history of the Balkans. I imagine myself speaking fluently, understanding the culture nuances. I'm having a great time. I'm laughing. I'm exploring, the culture from a different perspective. So this seems like a trivial exercise, but it has a huge impact on my motivation, because the truth is language learning is a marathon. Nowadays, we live in the era of the instant gratification. We want to get it here and we want to get it now. With language learning, no matter how fast you think you're going, it's going to take you a long time. So every time that you have some doubts, that you doubt yourself, that the stretch in the journey seems very long, I believe that knowing in your heart why you're doing that, why you set upon this journey, is always important. When people ask me, why do you speak 14 languages? I remember a family member asked me once, "Look, why are you learning Hungarian?" Just nobody speaks Hungarian. Just people in Hungary say, "Well, there's 10 million people in Hungary, and I hope I will be living in Hungary." For me, when I'm learning Hungarian or Serbian, or when I will be learning Serbian, or when I will be learning another language, I will think about what this language will bring about in my life. I never learn in a vacuum. I never learn a language just because I have to add another language under my belt. And once I did that with Romanian, I had no emotional connection. And despite the fact that Romanian is a relatively easy language for an Italian, I dropped it because I didn't have an emotional connection. I didn't jot down and thought, I want to be in Romania. I want to make friends. I want to explore the Romanian culture. No interest, no emotion in that. I just wanted to add another, I admit it, another language, thinking that's easy, but that turned out to be quite difficult because I did not have this emotional connection. I don't know if this has ever happened to you.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, loads of times, and I think this might be one of the key reasons that we fail at languages, and that gives kind of the future bad negative feelings about learning languages in general, because in school you don't choose, right? Often it's like you can learn Spanish or you cannot learn Spanish. It's like a lot of schools is like you just have to go through these languages. um I maybe you've had a lot of, I know you've had a lot of coaching students over the years for language learning. Do you have any examples of what some of those reasons might be, some of the most powerful reasons that you've heard for learning a language?
There's a lot of different reasons. I think one of the most powerful reasons, especially from Americans who have like European heritage. In particular, three. I had three American students. Their grandparents were Italian, and they really wanted to. They really want to not only speak Italian. To one moved to Italy, another one is planning on moving to Italy. So one of the reason, a very powerful reason, is when, and again, goes back to the emotional connection. You want to speak the language of your family, of your heritage, in a way, right? So this is one example. Another strong example: people who are very motivated when it comes to speaking the language of their partner. They have a partner who speaks another language. It's not so much about speaking with their partner in the language, because nowadays, if say a French girl and a German guy meet and they don't speak each other's language, maybe they end up speaking English. But to speak with their friends, to speak with their parents, to speak with the world behind the partner that you have. So these two are very strong reasons. There's people who want to live in the country for working reasons, or because they're fascinated by the culture. I've had all sorts of students having different reasons, but normally I would say that the common denominator of this is that there's an emotional connection, either with family members or partners. It's connected with life. It's connected with fulfilling your dreams,
Hmm.
having another, adding another part of your life in the language. And those in particular, those students have these reasons. They are very motivated. And on the other hand, I've had other people who were learning just because they wanted to add languages under their belts, so they had external reasons. They found it more difficult. At the beginning they're very enthusiastic, but then with time, when you really don't see, your brain doesn't see a reason, say, well, why are you learning this language? It's so much
Right.
effort. You're not talking to anyone, you're not reading a book in the language, you're not exploring literature, you're not interested. Then you lose steam. So to go back to what you were asking me, I believe that the first fundamental rule of language learning and in acquiring any skill in general is to know exactly why you want to do that, connect with it emotionally. And again, a little exercise that I do that always works is to take a piece of paper, take 30 minutes, write an emotional, realistic story or scenario where you're going to be speaking the language. Imagine yourself speaking the language fluently in a purposeful, meaningful context with other human beings. And in my case, and in other students' case, this works very well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's amazing. Have the why originally. Start with why.
Start with why. That's exactly right.
All right. So after we've got our strong why, and that can kind of carry you, especially through the hard times. I think that's where it really comes into handy. You've been studying, let's say, Russian for months, just banging your head against the wall. The grammar is impossible. The words look like nothing you've ever seen before. You want to quit, but then you think back to that story and you think back to that why, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, well, it's a marathon. There will be dips. It will be up and down. I'll get through it.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to add, the advantage of writing it down and keep it in next to you is a reminder of these dark times. If you have it next to you, like when you go through a dark period where you're telling yourself, why am I doing this? Then you're reminded, okay, let me read this. And the fact that it's physically there, of course, you can also type it, print it, but having something physical next to you that is visible is a great reminder when you tend to forget, because our memory works in a kind of in a strange way. We're putting a lot of effort at the beginning. We tend to remember, then we forget about the effort that we're putting, and we tend to get pushed around by other things. Life gets in the way, and then we lose sight of the reason why we're learning. And this happens so many times that I believe, again, that this is, for me, a rule or a principle that is at the center of everything. Knowing why you want to improve your life, you want to acquire another skill. Language learning is just one of the many skills you can acquire in life, but I believe that this is central and crucial to touch upon first and foremost.
Awesome. And let's move on to the second rule principle.
So what's the second rule for me? Of course. So for me, the second an important rule is to rely to make the language learning process, or the language learning acquisition process, revolve around input. What does it mean? There's a lot of discussion about input versus output. Some people different schools of thought. Some people think you have to speak from day one so you get the confidence, and other people say no, you have to get a lot of input, and then after some months or even after some years you can talk. Here's my opinion. In my opinion, I believe that it's not only a matter of massive input, of getting massive input, but also getting input that is both comprehensible. So on the one hand, it should be something that you should be able to understand, and it should be compelling or interesting. And this is what Stephen Krashen, who is a famous linguist, if you type Stephen Krashen, a lot of things will pop up. And he abides by this principle, that is, get input that is comprehensible and get input that is compelling and interesting. Let me explain what I mean by that. Imagine a situation where you just started learning Spanish, right? You're Italian or you're French or you're American. You think, oh, Spanish is relatively easy because it's kind of similar. So let me start watching movies, or let me start listening to the radio, and I will, get exposed to the language, and I will understand it. I will get better. That is maybe not a mistake, but you won't understand much because that is a level that is too high. You have to go through a passage where you acquire the capacity of understanding the language. It takes time. You want to start from the beginning with material that you can actually not only listen to, but also read, so that if you listen and read at the same time, you reap the benefits of both things. You can read, so you can actually see the words, and you can listen so that you can actually tell how these words are pronounced. And there's a very simple thing that adults can do, which is reading and listening at the same time, something kids cannot do, at least kids who are 1, 2, 3-year-old kids, because they don't have the capacity of reading. So why don't you leverage that capacity of reading and listening to stuff that you can find on the internet, that is aimed and built for beginners, like without naming any product. You can get a book with dialogues and audio and some grammar explanations or a vocabulary list that will help you understand the text. You can start with that. You can build a solid grasp of the language, at least the basic structures, and then you can move on to something a little bit more complicated, like podcasts, 10-minute, 15-minute podcasts that have transcripts. And then you move on to, oh, now I can understand the language. After 1 year of doing that, of listening and reading at the same time, your brain has enough samples to start understanding the language. So you can venture into the round of, oh, let me just start listening without reading. And then you start reading stuff. And then you start watching movies. And then you start doing this. And then you start doing that. I believe that the first 3 to 6 months where you have to go through the stuff, of these manuals for beginners, to me, it's interesting because it's completely new ground. But then the best is yet to come. Once you have a solid grasp, then you can venture into the real authentic content that is out there, one quick click away. And that's amazing. So on the one hand, the comprehensible is really important. Don't jump the gun. Don't try to understand something that is too difficult to understand. It's a very common mistake. On the other hand, you were saying something that struck a chord with me and that made total sense. You said, oh, in school you don't learn Spanish because you want to learn Spanish. You learn Spanish because you have to learn Spanish. Nobody told you why you have to learn. It's just there. So it's a language you have to learn. And following that train of thought, that line, what we do most of the time, what we have unlearned as adults going through school, is to actually enjoy the process of learning. Kids don't think about, oh, whether this is nice or not. They just enjoy communicating with other people. They play, etc. At school, what we have unlearned to do, or better, we have learned the wrong way, is to go through these terribly boring classes or boring lessons or boring content that we couldn't care less about. And we tend to think once we become adults, independent learners, that, oh, you have to do the grammar thing and you have to do this and you have to do that because that's what you have to do. You don't have to do anything in that regard. You just need to consume content that is interesting. So that's why, yes, at the beginning, you can go through some language material that has prepared dialogues for you. So there's not much choice. But the better you become after 3 months, you can start creating your own material. You can start creating bilingual text. There's so many tools nowadays that people are unaware of, in which you can grab a text in your target language. You can create an interlinear text with your native language. You can create a bilingual text. You can do so many things. So consume comprehensible and compelling content for a long period of time. This has been my theory. I've seen it myself. I've tried with Hungarian, even after so many years of experience. I thought, the more lessons I have in Hungarian, the more I speak, the better I'm going to become. Not necessarily true, especially if I live in Italy. I thought, something is wrong. I'm having 3 conversations every week with my tutors, 2 actually, and my level has stalled. And I realized that the reason why it had stalled was because these classes were going to the detriment of the time of input time. I was not spending any time with input. I was not listening to anything. I was not reading anything. I was just trying to have conversations and thinking, I speak, I get a little bit of audio of listening practice. It stalled. So first and foremost, get massive input. Stephen Krashen is right. At the beginning, I thought, oh, kind of weird. You get massive input and then you start speaking, but actually it's called language growth. Subconsciously, you are building the skills of speaking language. When the moment comes and you feel like you're ready to go, you're ready to talk, ready to communicate with native speakers, then all that input will play a huge role. And of course, if you want to start on top of that from day one, you can. If the language is not too difficult, if you're very confident, if you have a solid language learning background, then by all means do that. But I tend to prefer to do it a little bit later.
No, that's good. And just summarizing what you said. So the as much input as possible, especially in the beginning, make sure the input is enjoyable to you, interesting, or and that it is suitable to your level. So when you're starting out, you're looking at potentially textbooks that come with CDs or well, digital downloads these days, I suppose, um, to kind of give you that because you can't just pick up Harry Potter and Swedish or something and just start reading it on day one, even if you know the story inside out.
Yep.
No, I think that's absolutely true, and this is something we don't do enough. And I think my theory has become a little bit that, let's say you have a tutoring session. I think, of course, you learn something, but I think in a tutoring session, probably what you do the most is just kind of using what you already know. So even though there is some times where the teacher will say, no, you have to say it this way, this is the word you're missing, and you learn a little bit, I think the real learning comes outside the class. So the classes are more like putting it into practice and just becoming more confident and practicing your pronunciation and your listening skills. So definitely doing more input is a fantastic idea, and but it can be tricky. If you're doing a language that isn't too popular or too common, finding that kind of level of language that's still challenging but not too challenging, that's tricky.
You're right. There's a lot of tricky parts to this. For example, finding content that is perfect for your level. And as you said, when it comes to materials, when it comes to languages that are quote unquote exotic or a little bit more less popular, let's say, it's more difficult to find material. I'm having this with some students. A student in particular is learning Estonian. He's finding it frustrating to find material because there's no material. And my suggestion there is to build your own material. I know this is maybe a piece of advice for advanced learners, but I think everybody can apply this. What you could do is that instead of thinking of complaining, oh, there's nothing, I cannot find anything, what you can do is to use the power of the internet to create your own material, even for languages that
Hmm.
are obscure. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you're an American learning, say, I don't know, Estonian or Finnish, where there's not a lot of resources. Or there was a recent one, Telugu, or I don't know if I pronounce it, whatever. And kind of a language is not that it, for which there's not a lot of materials. What you can do is you can find a native speaker, because these are not really difficult to find when you have platforms where you can contact people, you can pay them. You pay them, you tell them, look, I would like you to help me build my bilingual material. Could we could you help me? Then you tell him, you give him, I will give you this much, this is a project. Then you give him, you find a resource you like. So you find some short texts in English, and then you tell him to translate and create the audio for you, which is something I'm doing. So there you have it. There, even if you don't have resources, you have created your own resources with the advantage that not only do you have the resources in two languages, in your native language or in English and in your target language, but also on top of that, you also have the audio. And on top of that, you can also ask him to provide some explanations if you, by mere comparison of the two texts, you cannot understand the grammar. I understand that for language resources for beginners are great in the sense that they have explanations, right? If, even if they have two texts, like one in your native language and one in your target language that you can compare, there is this phenomenon that's called language distance. So if a language is really different from your native language or English, or a language you're using as a crutch to learn your target language, there will always be points that are difficult to understand intuitively. It's difficult to do that just by mere comparison. That's why some resources for beginners have these explanations that are fantastic, because they fill in the gaps. I don't understand this. Oh, but there's a star. Let me check the grammar explanation. If you're learning a language that is very similar, that's not a problem. Italian, Spanish, I mean, you can use grammar explanations, but for some languages, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, you don't need any grammar explanations almost. But for languages that are, I don't know, Italian, German, that's already, you might need a few explanations here and there. Italian, Russian, English, Russian, they're understanding things just by mere input. I think it's difficult. So
Yeah.
so my two pieces of advice. First piece of advice, if you're learning a language that doesn't have a lot of resources, create them yourselves by using English. You find someone, you tell them, look, this is like, I'm going to pay you this much and you're going to translate these texts. They can even use Google Translate or DeepL, and then they can fix the text. So it's really easy nowadays to create stuff, and then you ask them to read them out loud, because audio is important. And then if the language is really, really distant, or just distant from yours and very different, then you should ask him to either provide something, they can write something directly, some explanations, if they already understand, if they're language aware. And if not, you go through it every time. You just make a list of things, of doubts, you send these doubts, and then you get an answer back. So you can use a native speaker, even if use is a bad term, but you can leverage the presence of a native speaker to help you create the material that you want to get started.
And of course, you could also do live lessons with them and get any questions
Okay.
answered. So, but let's jump straight ahead to number 3, as we are running a little bit out of time here, but we'll make it. We'll
Yeah,
make it.
I tend to ramble. I'll I'll speak a little bit less. To me, rule number three is to build a growth mindset, a positive language mindset. And what does it mean? Um, Going back to what I was saying before, I think psychology plays a huge role, especially for beginners. So knowing why you're doing something is great, but then you also have to learn to have a positive approach towards language learning in general. I believe that there's a big difference between we can divide learners in this regard into mainly two categories: those who have made it and those who have never made it. So those who have already learned a foreign language, they already know that they can do it. Those who have never done it before, they don't know that they can do it. They doubt themselves that they can
Hmm.
actually do it. This is a very important point. I had a student of mine had never learned a language before. He was constantly asking me, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? When are we going to get fluent? And he was not sure that he would get there. So developing a positive mindset means that you learn to do that. It's not that you just do, okay, today I have a positive mindset. It's something that you learn. It's a skill that you develop. And by positive mindset, I mean have a positive approach. Every time that you get frustrated because you don't understand, just try again or try another approach. But when you talk to someone, for example, this also goes back to having a positive versus having a negative mindset. You might think, oh my God, he's just judging me for all the mistakes I'm making. Well, actually, he's appreciating me. Everything is in our head. So to me, developing a positive mindset is like in any other skill, is one of the most important things for language learners. And
Hmm.
someone, for all those who are listening to us and watching us, they might say, well, Luca, it's easy for you to say that you speak a bunch of languages, you have experience. You build this through experience. Every time that you feel like fear is keeping you from doing things, from talking to someone, from try your hand at something new, you have to know that the easiest way to do that is to face your fears. If you don't face your fears and you stay within your cocoon, you
Hmm.
will never learn. Every sort of growth entails a little bit of discomfort. So remember that, because having a positive mindset is going to have a huge impact on all your language learning activities and on whether you're going to make it or not. So that's very important.
Great. And of course, this the point of this whole event is to showcase a lot of different people who have learned tons of languages with all different backgrounds and nationalities and ages, and to give people that confidence that you can also do it. This isn't some kind of you don't need like a god-given talent for languages or be born with some special genes or parents or in a special location. Anyone can truly get something with languages. It might not be double interpreter in four different languages to fluency, but you can definitely get speaking in languages and then build from there. So that's the whole point. That's why we're here. So
I'll say one more thing, and shortly. I know we're running out of time, but if you speak your own native language well, if you don't have any language impairment due to genetics or due to something, you are perfectly able to learn any other language on the planet. It's just that it's in your mind. If you haven't done it yet, it's because you've heard that it's difficult, or you perceive it as difficult. The reality is the human brain is wired to learn a bunch of foreign languages. I think a minority of the entire population speaks just one language. Americans, Italians, and some other peoples, but in general, in Africa, in India,
of
people
course,
speak
yeah.
4 or 5 languages on average. So you can. It doesn't depend on your genes. It's an excuse that we come up with sometimes to justify the fact that we don't want to learn or we're scared of learning. Well, you're perfectly able to learn anything, not
Yeah,
just languages.
and that often comes when you face that first kind of hurdle of, oh, I don't feel like I'm learning anything. Maybe I'm just not good at languages. I'll just quit. But that's the time to just push on and keep going. And speaking of keeping going, we've got number four.
So number four is to create a system that is conducive to learning. People have, focus on goals. I want to speak this. I want to do this. I want to speak fluently. I believe, as James Clear, who's a habit guru. I don't know if you ever heard of the author of Atomic Habits. One thing that really struck me is focus on systems, not on goals. Goals are important, they give you direction, but systems get you there actually. And in terms of language learning, when I mean create a system conducive to learning, I mean work on your environment. Design your environment so that it's easy to sit down and learn, and it's easy to learn itself. What do I mean by that? Well, just an example. If you want to make sure that you learn every day, create a specific space with your language learning material already there, so that it's already there. You don't have to make an effort to look for it, or it's a reminder that it's there. You have your own spot, you have your own place, you have the material there. And also make sure that it's easy to start. What do I mean by easy to start is that for example, you can create something which in behavioral design is called anchoring. Let me give you a very concrete example. Anchoring means to attach one habit with another habit that you already have. If your routine, morning routine is you wake up, you have breakfast, you take a shower. After the shower, you could actually design, oh, after the shower, I'm gonna learn languages, so that you already know that that time slot comes at next, and you don't have to make any effort. You have to remove the friction of actually sitting there and getting started. You know, when I'm pretty sure this has happened to you as well, Chris, that you don't feel like doing it. Then when you actually sit down and do it, you get into the flow and you say, why didn't I do it in the first place? I should have started earlier. And this is the biggest problem, is that people don't know how to start. If you design a routine where you have your own spot, you have the language learning material already there, and you anchor it with another habit, be it whatever, it's in your morning routine or it's your night routine, and you know that when you do it, you're relatively fresh and you have time, you take 30 minutes or 1 hour, then you have created a system that is conducive to starting to learn. And then the other important piece of the puzzle is to actually create a system where it's easy to learn. So not just easy to start, but easy to learn. What do I mean? What I mean is that if you, for example, before you start learning, you have to choose the podcast, or you have to choose the material, or you have to look for it, or you have to print it. This is all friction you do not want it, because it deprives you of precious energy that you want to put into learning. So what I mean is that if you say on weekends, on Saturdays or Sunday, you prepare your week beforehand, you already know what you're going to do every day. You already know the time, you already know you're going to do it because it comes after a certain habit, and you already have all the material, and you already know what you're going to do. It's easy. All you need to do is to do it just every single day. Well, all these things get in the way of preparing, or I don't know what I'm going to learn, I don't know what I'm going to do. Don't let it anything to chance. You know, if you think, oh, today I'm going to do it at 8, tomorrow I'm going to do it at 5, when I have time, you're never going to find the time. Create a system, create goals, but create a system first and foremost.
Right. So times of the week or day, if you're ambitious and you have the time for it, and then what you're going to do in those times as well. You know.
Right. Not if you have time. You have to find the time. It's not about having the
Right.
time. Just find the time. You just tell yourself, how long can I learn? 30 minutes? Okay. When do I feel fresh? In the morning. When after breakfast or after taking a shower? Okay, at 9 o'clock after the shower for 30 minutes, I'm gonna sit down where I know I'm gonna learn with the material I already know I'm gonna use, and with that specific piece of content that I'm going to learn. That's how you streamline it, you know?
Sounds great. So, what's the final rule or principle for fundamental language learning?
The truth is, there's a lot of rules we could be
Sure.
speaking,
Yeah.
but I wanted to summarize. I just thought about some rules that are really important for beginners, especially for beginners. And
Yeah.
speaking about systems, I believe that creating an accountability system is also important. And what do I mean by accountability system? So you might be surprised by the way that I'm not talking about how to learn grammar, how to learn vocabulary, how to learn pronunciation. You're going to figure that if you have a system in place, you have a lot of pieces of advice that you can find on the internet. Chris shares in the podcast and everything he's building. But here I've noticed in my experience, because I've been teaching for 10 years, that these are the basics. And a lot of people don't talk about this stuff because it's important. So an accountability system is a system where you basically keep track of your learning. A lot of people are really worried about whether they're making progress, right? Am I making progress? Am I actually are my language skills improving? People don't know. It's difficult actually to measure. Some people try to measure it in the amount of words that you know, but it's a component, but not a very it's not a very precise actually factor or element in the grand scheme of things. So instead of thinking, am I improving or not, just make sure that you find a system where you every day, once you finish, for example, your learning session, you have a journal that you share, something very simple. It can be, okay, today I've done this, I've been keeping this for years and it works great. I've created a Google Doc for Greek and for Hungarian. Every time I finish a lesson, I take 2 minutes and I write the date, how long it took me, the thing I did of the day, and a short comment reflecting about my learning. It can be something very simple as, oh, I really enjoy this content, or there's something wrong with how I'm doing things for the material. Maybe I should change it. And the fact that I make sure that I build this from the top to the bottom, so that I don't have to scroll the whole thing. Now, with Google Doc, you can go directly to the end with an index. But by going through that, subconsciously, my mind is constantly reminded, oh, I've done all this stuff so far. So I'm keeping track. I'm not only keeping track of my learning in a very simple way, it's a habit that I have. At the end of each session, for 2 or 3 minutes, I spend 2 or 3 minutes just writing on my Google Doc what I did, how long it took me, and if I need it, just a couple of lines reflecting on whether I like it or not. Now, I'm a language buff and I'm able to motivate myself just with myself, but you know that there's comfort there's strength in unity in numbers. So if you have someone else, if you're working within a community, it's even better. I myself have built this community. I can see how people motivate each other, saying, oh, I've done this. Oh my God, that's great. And people cheering. That's great. But first build it for yourself. Pat yourself on the back. I do this. I don't pat myself on the back literally, but every time that I finish something, I get the kick of dopamine that makes me do it the next day. So if you create a system, an accountability system, where at the end of the day or at the end of the learning session, you write what you did, and you feel this dopamine rush because you have accomplished something. You have that, Chris, when you feel like, oh, I've done something, it's tick,
Absolutely.
that kind of satisfaction that really helps. So just to sum up, I just wanted to summarize. It's really important to know exactly why you're learning a language. It's important to consume content that is comprehensible, because in this way you can understand and you can improve. And that is something that is compelling. Do something that is enjoyable. You will want to do this again. This is very important. It's important to develop a solid mindset, because this is important for everything. The journey is going to be long, and this is going to, help you. And then at the end of the day, creating an accountability system and structuring your day, working on a system that is conducive to learning, and on top of that, creating an accountability system can do wonders for you.
A good sales speech for language learning right there, and being organized, of course, as well. And yeah, thank you so much for that, Luca. I really appreciate it. And of course, all the links will be in the description below for your with the stuff you're working on. And there's a big button down there for any kind of link we'll put in there for you. So if people are interested in finding out more about your work, they can click that big button and get to your website. And yeah, so I think we've covered what needs to be covered today. And if anyone has any questions for Luca, put it in the comments below or in the chat box, and I'm sure he'll come by someday and have a look at them when we're going. So the community, of course, is we have as well here for the New Year New Language conference. We have the VIP ticket, and that gives you access to the actual fluency community, which can do some of the things that Luca was talking about with the accountability. We'll do monthly check-ins and things like that. So definitely consider that if you haven't already upgraded your ticket. And otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. And Luca, thank you so much for being amazing as always. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you in the next one.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And happy language learning as always.